Hello everybody and welcome or welcome back to the second shelf. And as promised last Sunday, this is a video about the books that I read recently, and one book that I'm still reading, works by women in translation, because as we all know, August is Women in Translation Month, and so I try to include at least a couple of translated works into my 30 books in 30 days challenge. Of course, because of the challenge, I'm limited in terms of, not tomes. I'm not reading the big one of the really big books translated in August, because I just can't fit it in. But there are always a couple of smaller books or collection of poetry which will also be included here. So I've read 4 so far, and I am currently still reading one, which I will talk about at the end. So the first book that I read this month, and I didn't read it in one day because it's a poetry collection, Anna Akhmatova selected poems, and this vintage edition was published in 2009, I think, yes, but the poems, of course, are from an earlier date, translated from the Russian by D.M. Thomas, a British poet and translator who sadly died earlier this year. Anna Akhmatova was born in 1889 and died 1966. She is considered one of the most important modernist poems in the Russian language. And I've always meant to read her stuff, but as you know, if you follow my channel, I don't read that much poetry, and especially not if I can't read it in the original language. And my language skills are very limited, so everything except for German, Dutch, English, or French, I can't read in the original. And I always feel with poetry that makes it more difficult, because I don't know whether I get more of the translator's poems or whether I really get the original flow of the language, the imagery. So yeah, but the translator here, D.M. Thomas, is a renowned, or was a renowned poet. So I just hope for the best. The collection, it's a thin collection, but it spans the whole of Akhmatova's life's work. So the first is, I think, a poem from 1909. And then it goes all the way up to the 60s. I'm 1909, furiously turning pages, 1909, and it goes all the way up to the 60s. And it's extremely impressive and engaging. They are often quite political poems about the hero with no name, about friends of hers. She writes about political situation in, for instance, First World War, but also under Stalin. Her husband, she was married and then divorced, and her ex-husband was executed. Her son was incarcerated a couple of times, but she is not writing political pamphlets. So you can read these poems, at least that was my experience, without knowing her specific maybe reason to write a certain poem, because they are, like poems should, they are just universal. They talk about the universal human experience. So they are not easy to digest for me. So even though it is only 120 pages or something, it took me a week or a week and a half. And it's certainly also, at least for me, always with poems, I have to reread them. So I can count this book because I finished the poems, but that is certainly not how I look at this collection. I'm still on the pile of to read books, because I want to go back and reread certain poems. But it's definitely a recommendation. The next one, let me just check my list. Yes, the next one is non-fiction. Anna Sverdrup Thygesen, Extraordinary Insect, translated from the Norwegian by somebody I forgot because it was not mentioned on the book. So I will have to, again, I'm sorry, we'll have to include the translator in the description box, of course. This is, the author is a Norwegian scholar, professor at the university, and she researches insects. And this book is the pick of the Book Naturalist Book Club. You know, the book club run by Heidi from My Reading Life and Doris from All the Books, where they pick, they pre-select 12 books or authors, nature writing, one for each month, in order to encourage us to read more nature, about nature. And this one, of course, is in translation, and I'm extremely happy because it's, for me, not that easy to include non-fiction in translation. Fiction in translation is never really a problem, but to find non-fiction in translation is often not that easy because probably not that much nonfiction is actually translated into English. But anyway, so this book was published this year. As you can see, I don't have a physical copy. And I thought it was fascinating. I will say, if you are completely grossed out by insects, it's probably not a book for you. I'm not an insect lover. It's not that I, collect beetles or look at them in admiration. So I would say you are quite normal attitude towards insects. I don't like flies and I don't like wasps, but But this book, so if you're really grossed out, it's not for you. It's also, I think, not for you if you are an insect lover and already know a lot about insects, because this book is giving also basic information about what is an insect, the various types of insect. It's also talking about how insects feed themselves. There's anecdotes about the weird stuff, which are really, really interesting, I find. But if you are already a connoisseur, then this book will probably not add anything. But I thought it was fascinating. I loved reading it. I thought the way she talked about these critters was engaging. So it was a really, really good book for me. The next one that I read was a translation from the French and also a non-fiction book. Happy to have found that. And that is Nathalie Léger, Exposition, translated from the French by Amanda DeMarco. The French was published in 2008 and the translation in English in 2019. This is also on my 1001 books by women I want to read before I die list. So I did checked a couple of boxes. I don't want to say anymore. One bird with two stones, because no, we don't want to say that anymore. And this is also fitting for my quest to read books by independent publishers. Nathalie Léger is a French author, a contemporary author, and this book is another hybrid memoir with art at the center. And you know me, that's something that I'm really interested in. And it is about a woman called, her married name was the Countess of Castiglione. I will leave a link to her Wikipedia page down below, and I will insert a picture, probably on the other side here, a very famous photograph of hers. And she lived she was born in 1837, something like that. So she lived in the 20th century, the first half of the 20th century. A well-to-do woman, married. At least at the beginning she was well-to-do, and after her marriage we will learn about her life in the book. But she was known, and is still known, because she had so many photographs taken of herself. So this was way before the selfie, but she took selfies, or she had other, especially one Paris photographer, take selfies of her. And the way, how important that was, and the history of these photographs is the red thread in this kind of exploration of exposition, to expose yourself in photographs about yourself, and also exploring Léger's own life. I really enjoyed it. It was not a 5-star or even a 4-star read for me. I think I gave it 3.5 in Goodreads terms, because it was a little maybe too inaccessible for me on some points, that I had difficulty to understand what she was talking about. But I still feel, if you are interested in that topic, and maybe the person, Countess Castiglione, this might be a book that interests you. Okay, and the fourth book that I read, again, I don't have a physical copy, was Marie-Judith de Carvalho, Empty Wardrobes, translated from the Portuguese by Margaret Jill Costa, published in 1966 in the Portuguese original, and a couple of years ago, 2019, in the English translation. So de Carvalho was a Portuguese author. This is also a book that is on my 1001 list. One of the few Portuguese authors, or books in Portuguese. So I have, I think, 2 Brazilian authors and 2 or 3 Portuguese authors on the list. And this was a weird little book. It's about a woman whose husband died a couple of years ago, and she is very much, how do you say that? Has a certain routine of grieving, mourning her husband's death, and it's 10 years. Her name is Dora, by the way. And then something happens. She finds out something, is told something that kind of puts her world upside down. We also have a daughter and a possible new relationship partner for Dora, but will be a twist there that I'm not going to reveal because that will spoil you. I don't know. I like that theme, and the language of the book, the theme of this, prolonged grief, and this idea of what do we really know about other people, or even people we are close to. But in the end, it was a bit too, fragmented, the story. There was this weird relationship between Dora and the wife of a friend of hers. Then there is also some stuff happening to Dora, nothing rape or anything, and it was as if you had these snippets for a good story, but it was not really worked out in any depth, if that makes sense. So it was not bad at all, and it was interesting, certainly, but it was not a book that that I was really completely engaged in or blown away. It was a bit, okay, and then it ended, and that's it. But maybe I need to reread it. So if you have read Empty Wardrobes, let me know what your take on it was. And then the book I'm still working on is also non-fiction, translated non-fiction. Shay Shonagon, the Pillow Book, translated, relatively new translated, or the most recent translation by Meredith McKinney. And this is also on the 1001 list, and it's also the August pick for of my list of 12 classics that I will read in 2023. So you might, if you join me, you might read along with this one. This is the Diaries of a noblewoman, a Japanese noblewoman in the book was published in 1002. So she lived from the end of the 10th century until the middle of the 11th century, something like that, as far as we know. And for a time, she was a noblewoman. How do you say that? A gentlewoman, not a noblewoman, a gentlewoman at the court, which means she was kind of a lady in waiting for the empress. I read one other book set in that time period in Japan, and that is The Tale of Genji, which is that's a novel and focusing around a male character, Genji, but written by a woman. And I'm reading this, by the way, as a buddy read with Heidi from my reading life, and it's fascinating. I know very, very little about Japanese history, and certainly imperial Japan in the 10th century, 11th century. No, I'm really an ignorant. So it's fascinating from that point of view, because of course we learn about, the court life and what it is like in that court. We don't learn much about regular life, the commoners as they are called in the book. So it's really focusing on nobility and life at the court. But still, I learn a lot about life at that time period. And there are a lot of things that are completely alien to me when she talks about the relationship and the rituals and the kind of formalistic structure that life has, and what they value, and what they feel is beauty. And that's completely alien to me, which makes it interesting, of course. And then there are things that you can so much relate to, at least I can, stuff about how she hates when men snore at night, or that somebody would open the door and enter the room and not close the door behind her, that is annoying. So this combination of a life that couldn't be further from my own experience and knowledge, and stuff that is just, I could have written that. It's fascinating. But as always, I will make a full review of this book once we have finished it towards the end of the month. And then we will pick the September book. Anyway, so these were 5 books that I read or am still reading for Women in Translation Month. Thank you very much for watching. As always, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to your comments, and I'll talk to you all soon in the next one.